Hello and welcome. Has President Barack Obama made a U-turn on Guantanamo Bay? It's a question being asked following Mr. Obama's decision a few days ago to revive the Bush-era military tribunals for some of those held at the controversial detention center. On his second day in office, President Obama pledged to close the U.S. military prison by January 2010. But as the arrangements for the 241 detainees are being discussed, he's meeting resistance from some who are opposed to the idea of housing foreign terrorism suspects in the U.S. These lawmakers and politicians have said they will deny the president's request for $80 million to relocate the prisoners. There's debates taking place in an already tense atmosphere in Washington, D.C., following that decision to reinstate military commissions to try terrorism suspects, a system President Obama once criticized as flawed. In addition, America's most powerful woman politician, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, is under fire over what she knew about Bush-era interrogation policies, such as waterboarding. On today's show, we ask, is President Barack Obama tied to George Bush's legacy on Guantanamo? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room, and then take part. We, of course, welcome your phone calls on the show as well. Well, to debate the issues surrounding Gitmo, I'm joined by David Kaye, Executive Director of the UCLA School of Law's International Human Rights Program, who served as a lawyer with the U.S. State Department with responsibility for the law of war and also handled legal issues relating to Guantanamo Bay detainees. Professor Kaye is in Los Angeles. Also with us is Charles Stimson, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He served as the Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Detainee Affairs, advising on detention policy that included Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, if I could start with you there in Los Angeles, is this actually a U-turn for Barack Obama? Has he essentially reneged on his promises regarding Guantanamo Bay?
I don't think so. I think that what we need to really do is put in context what is going on in Washington right now. Essentially, Barack Obama has said that he wants to fix the 8 years of Bush administration detention policy, and he's fighting battles on three fronts. He's fighting battles on Guantanamo, that is whether to close it and what to do with the detainees who are there now. He's facing issues on interrogation policy, where he has already promised to undo the interrogation, the harsh interrogation and torture policies of the last administration. And at the same time, he's dealing with the question of prosecution and military commissions. And when you put all of those things together, I think that generally the Obama administration is heading in the right direction, but there are battles that he has to fight, and it's clear that he's sort of picking his battles slowly, and politics is interfering with some of the things that he wants to do.
Well, Professor, let me put an email question to you. We had from Texas someone who's a little cynical perhaps on this. It's Daniel Uren in Texas in the USA, who says, Barack Obama has proven himself to be a career politician, no different from the people he ran so adamantly against in 2008. What he presented during his passionate presidential campaign was a complete hoax. Maybe a long time ago, Obama sincerely had dreams of hope and change, but that was before D.C. So I wonder how important it is for President Obama to follow through on his pledges.
Well, it's a good question. I think that it is important for him to follow through on his pledges, and I think what we need to do is go back to the days immediately after his inauguration, when the first steps that President Obama took were related to Guantanamo. He promised that he would close Guantanamo within a year. So by the end of next January, according to his executive order, Guantanamo should be closed, and his administration is working hard to do that. At the same time, he ended unlawful interrogations. So at least on those two issues, it's clear that he wasn't perpetrating some kind of hoax. He was following through on what he had committed to do during the campaign.
Okay. Carly Stimson, great to have you with us as well, sir.
Pleased to be here.
You know, I wonder, you were in the thick of things for a number of years. You were advising key people such as the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. And I wonder, when you look at the reviving of these military commissions, what benefit do you think they would serve? I mean, how can they actually make a difference when it comes to the fate of the detainees in Guantanamo?
Yeah, well, I thought at the time in 2006, when they revived the Military Commissions Act, that it was flawed, just like then Senator, now President Obama. The things that I was concerned about are the very things that he's proposing to fix. But it remains to be seen how much Congress wants to play. Because during the Bush administration, Bush took a very unilateralist approach, and Congress remained very standoffish and didn't want to get involved in detention policy making unless they absolutely had to, and that was usually after a Supreme Court spanked the Bush administration and ruled against them. And so I want to follow up on something David said. I mean, in one way, the answer to your question is a very clear yes and no. Many of the policies that the Obama administration is proposing with respect to Guantanamo, et cetera, is simply a continuation, at most an acceleration of the Bush administration policies. It is a clean break to say, though, that he stopped the CIA from using enhanced interrogation techniques, and that is a big change, and limited them to the Army Field Manual techniques, the 19 techniques in the Army Field Manual. But I think it surprised many on the left that he revived these military commissions, and it's angered them.
I wonder, looking at what Guantanamo has achieved in its 7 or so years of life as it's sort of being wound up, what were the actual results, do you think? What do you think it really effectively proved to do as far as what it was supposed to achieve?
Yeah, I think in many ways it's been a failure. And in other ways it's been a success in the very least narrow sense that it's kept some of those very dangerous people from going back to combatant activity. In concept, it should not be controversial, Riz, to take the enemy off the battlefield and detain them humanely. The execution of that concept, though, has been flawed in a number of ways that I think David and I, and probably you, would agree on. And there are a lot of ways the Bush administration should have gone about getting buy-in by Congress early on for a place to detain them, buy-in for commissions, and buy-in in a lot of things, but they didn't do that, and now they're suffering from that.
And presumably in choosing the people who did get detained, because so many were sort of seen to be taken randomly as well.
Yeah, there's a random nature of it. In this war, unlike other wars, this enemy is not apt to whip out their Geneva-compliant identification card. And the Bush administration had at peak 780 detainees at Guantanamo back in 2002 and started releasing people in the spring of 2002, which is an overt acknowledgement that they had some of the wrong people early on.
Professor David Kaye, if I can get to you on the issue of the U.S. courts potentially dealing with some of the detainees, how well geared up are the U.S. courts to deal with the Guantanamo suspects?
Well, it's a very good question. I think that if we look back in the 90s, there were a number of terrorism trials in U.S. federal courts, and I think that those courts could be made available to try some of those who are detained at Guantanamo. The reality, of course, is that we're talking about a great number more individuals than we would be talking about, or we would have been talking about in the 1990s. But I think the federal district courts in the United States are amply available in order to try individuals who are held at Guantanamo. I mean, I think one thing to mention that I'd want to highlight that Cully said is the nature of the Obama administration's plan right now is much different than the Bush administration's approach, right? The Obama administration, I think, is trying to move forward in a way that acknowledges that Congress has a role, acknowledges that our allies have a role in this. That includes our allies in Europe, who should be making themselves available to take some of the detainees. This was quite different from at least in the early years of the Bush administration. Before Cully was there, I should add, when it was unilateral, when Congress wasn't consulted. And a lot of these policies that we're talking about that need to be fixed really do require working together with Congress. It seems right now that the politics in Washington are not aligning to make that very easy for President Obama.
Mr. Secretary, do you think that the U.S. court system could give the detainees a fair trial? I mean, considering the whole image of Guantanamo is tainted, but also the people who are held, there seems to be an aura hanging around them too. Can they get a fair trial in the U.S. system?
I have no doubt they can get a fair trial in the U.S. system. I'm very proud, as I think most Americans are, of our federal courts. I was a federal court prosecutor here in Washington. The question is it applicable and the appropriate vehicle for all the detainees who the administration wants to try? And I think the Obama administration has answered that very loudly this week by saying, no, not for all of them, but for some, we're going to use upgraded military commissions. And excuse me, and I think part of that is due to the fact that these folks have been captured in situations after 9/11 that don't lend themselves to Miranda rights, Fifth Amendment rights, Sixth Amendment rights under the Constitution, and that they've made the calculus after looking at these cases that they couldn't push those cases through the federal courts and achieve some fair result.
We've got a caller on the line from Louisiana. Patrick, what would you like to ask?
I would simply like to comment that as an American, as a teacher of American history, civics, and politics, I am absolutely ashamed of what my country has done in the name of so-called neocon freedom. And this gentleman you have speaking with you, the Obama administration, and I voted for the guy, but I'm having second thoughts on that even. The idea that you can deny anybody justice, whatever their political beliefs or their bent, is is counter to everything that this country stands for, or at least was purported, or what I was brought up to believe that this country stands for.
Patrick, let me put that to Mr. Secretary here. There's no doubt there's going to have to be some kind of, I guess, adjustment to the way what America's done to its image with Guantanamo. It's really hurt itself in international eyes as well as at home, it seems.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Riz. I think David and I are probably in violent agreement on that point. And I think the caller really encapsulates very nicely this strain, this feeling that we're America. We're the country that a lot of people try to come to. We are the beacon of hope and liberty. We should be the exemplar around the world of the rule of law and human rights. It's important to note as an historical matter, since he's a teacher of history, is that traditionally in the time of war, folks who are captured, not killed, are denied access to the courts and are kept off the battlefield, not to punish them, but to make sure they don't engage in further combatant activity. But the caller is right. This is the really conundrum here, because these folks don't squarely fall into the 3rd Geneva Conventions as POWs, and they clearly are not just plain civilians, which are under the 4th Geneva Convention. And so I think the caller has his finger on one of the big conundrums here.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to stand by. We have to, sorry, Professor, I'm going to ask you just stand by for a second. We have to take a short break now. As we pause, let me remind you that you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see the debate taking place there now. We also have a poll in our chat room where today we're asking, do you think President Obama can keep his promise to close Guantanamo by 2010? Go into the chat room, let us know what you think. We'll be right back.